Good day, and welcome to the Keeping the Doors Open Sustainability Tips for Fatherhood Programs webinar. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Patrick Patterson. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. We're very excited about this September webinar, recognizing that funding and sustainability are two of the most important things that keep our program doors open. Really excited about the panel of speakers that we have today and going to just dive right in. Of course, our topic today is keeping the doors open. Sustainability tips for fatherhood programs. If you know the history of the program, there has been funding federally, there's been private dollars, there's been even some corporate dollars, but it's ebbed and flowed. And so we have three outstanding speakers who are going to walk us through their experience, their challenges, but also their successes and lessons learned to hopefully help you guys as you look forward to the future with your programs. Next slide. I don't want to assume that any of you guys know who the Clearinghouse is. My name is Patrick Patterson. I manage the Clearinghouse. This is our 7th year. We are a federally funded resource that provides support to programs, to practitioners, to dads, researchers, and policymakers across the country. We pride ourselves on the ability to provide not only resources in person through conferences and webinars, but also materials on our website. Next slide. The first place that many of you meet us is our website, fatherhood.gov. On a really strong, good month, we may get 1 million hits on our website. After that, particularly around Father's Day, it kind of ebbs and flows, but it's our major interface with the public. We're very proud of the resources that we've developed along the way. I always encourage folks that our website is never a finished product. As the field develops, so does our website. There are 2 things that I would just point you to on our website. One is our toolkit. If you are new or a veteran in the fatherhood field, this resource is for you. It's downloadable and on our website. The second thing that I'll point you to on our website is a link where we have archives of all of our past webinars, some amazing speakers, really rich content that we've made available to you guys. And then I'll lastly point you to, if you have any questions during the webinar, after the webinar, you want to reach out to us for today's content or anything else, go to info@fatherhood.gov. It's our immediate direct contact for you guys. As a resource to the field, in addition to having the website, we have a call center, a hotline for parents to call, for dads and moms to call, with questions around child support, visitation, custody, co-parenting, and things of that sort. It's available 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and we have both English and Spanish-speaking attendants to receive and answer your questions on those calls. Last but not least, I'll point to what is probably a newer feature for us. Research has shown us that many of our fathers and audience members are on social media. And so with OFA, our federal partner's approval, we're both on Facebook and Twitter at fatherhood.gov. We receive a lot of information on our social media, but we also disperse a lot of information. So if you're having events, if you want to communicate to us in that channel as well, you can reach us on Facebook and Twitter at fatherhood.gov. In the next few months, one of our most exciting elements that we're going to be adding is an Instagram account that will allow us to chronicle the beautiful joys of parenting through the eyes of fathers across the country. I'll highlight a couple of the key names that allow us to do what we do. John Allen, who works in the Federal Office of Family Assistance in Washington, D.C., is our contracting officer. Kenneth Braswell is the director of the Clearinghouse, and myself, Patrick Patterson, is the manager. I've just left you with each of the email addresses so that you can reach out to either one of us after today's webinar or in the future. So let's jump into today's webinar. Next slide. We have, like I said, an awesome panel of presenters. Our goal today is to really provide with resources related to sustainability as it relates to fatherhood programs. If you're working in other areas, there may be some transferable information you received today, but I really want to allow us to hear specifically from 3 of the best in the field who've done amazing work for a long period of time, who've sustained their programs to share with you guys what they've learned. You're going to receive information and tips from First, Dr. Michelle Foster. She's the president and CEO of the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation in Charleston, West Virginia. She is formerly a director, CEO of one of the federally funded projects, so she has 2 points of reference as the president of a foundation, but also as a former Fatherhood program director who can share with you guys. The second presenter is Dr. Andrew Freeberg. He's the director of community programs for the Father Project, Goodwill Easter Seals, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, who is a longtime servant in this field and has done an amazing job of locating, accessing, and securing dollars on both public and private sector. And then last but not least is Kathy Lambert, co-founder and CEO of the Connections to Success Project in St. Charles, Missouri. An amazing project, has done some really innovative things that if she doesn't mention, I'm going to pinch and try to get them to come out, because she's made partnerships with Starbucks, for example, to allow their program to be sustained beyond private and foundation and federal dollars as well. So really looking forward to hearing from each of our speakers today. After today, we'll have a list of helpful resources available for you to download that will allow you to retrieve what you heard today, but also some other links to information as well. There's a question and answer session that will be open at the very end of today's webinar. And so I'll try my best to answer as many questions as you guys have as we're leading to the next slide. I want to share with you, next slide, how you can submit questions during today's webinar. If you look at your screen, you'll see an Ask a Question box at the very bottom. You can submit your questions through there. We're going to tabulate all those questions and try to get as many of those answered as quickly as possible after each of our presenters conclude at the very end of the webinar. If you have a thought or a question that comes to you after the webinar concludes, you can still submit those to our email address that I shared with you guys earlier, info@fatherhood.gov, info@fatherhood.gov. It is my joy and delight, next slide, to introduce you to our first presenter. Our first presenter is Dr. Michelle Foster. As I mentioned, she's the president and CEO of the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation. Her bio is one that is extensive, so I'll give you a brief. Michelle has been president and CEO of the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation since February 2016. During that time, she has focused on developing an impact measurable framework to help the foundation and its donors fully understand the social return on their community investments. Prior to joining the foundation, Michelle was CEO of the Kanawha Institute for Social Research and Action, otherwise known as KISRA for many of us, for 18 years, and a chemical engineer at Union Carbide, now Dow, for 5 years. She has a doctorate in community economic development and 2 master's degrees, one in community economic development and another in engineering management. She is a certified economic development financial professional and a certified housing development financial professional as well. Before she starts, I want to give space for our first poll question. So if you could bring that poll question up, and then we'll have Dr. Foster to follow. Just click on the question, the response, as it pertains to you. The question is, what sources of funding does your organization currently have? Please check all applicable responses. And so we'll give just a few seconds for you guys to respond, and then after that you'll hear from Dr. Foster. Okay, Dr. Foster, the time is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today. I will do my best to share knowledge that I acquired while operating the KISRA Fatherhood program for over 12 years, and also my perspective from now being a funder, being on the other side. First off, the definition of sustainability that I am describing to today is just the ability to maintain an initiative and all of its benefits over time. As long as it's needed, being able to maintain that initiative. And I would like to suggest a framework a framework containing 8 domains, all of which I believe are key to sustaining a community initiative. These domains are strategic planning, partnerships, organizational capacity, program evaluation, program adaptation, communications, environmental support, and the one we always seem to focus on, funding stability. When we start at our Kids Fatherhood program, we actually started our program in 2003 with local funding from the state, leftover funding from a Welfare to Work program, and then we earned our first grant from OFA in 2006. So we've been around the OFA circle a while now, and I left the organization in 2016. So first off, strategic planning. It's where you're really using a systematic approach to guiding your program with regards to its strategies and your goals. Strategic planning is the glue that holds sustainability efforts together. Without a strategic direction and long-term desired outcomes, initiatives find themselves being more reactionary to day-to-day demands. There are always going to be fires starting and some issues, some participants, some partner issues in those areas popping up every day. So it's important to have your strategic plan and to remember why you're doing this work and where you're headed. Strategic planning combines elements of all the sustainability domains into an outcome-oriented plan. So this planning really helps to ensure that the initiative is well aligned with the larger external as well as the organizational environment. A 3-year strategic plan is ideal, and it's really a process of reflecting on where you are and considering where you want to go, and then coming up with some specific targets for your program and for your organization. The next domain is the partnership domain. So it's really where you're cultivating connections between your initiative and other key stakeholders. So depending on the design of your program, that could be workforce development, the child support office, a local funder, local employers, just an array of stakeholders that you can bring to the table. Partners play an important role in sustainability in many ways. They help to connect you and your participants to greater resources or expertise. They also may be other service providers who will help you to deliver your model program. Partners also help with advocacy. A lot of times we're often just inundated with the work that we don't have the opportunity to advocate for our program. So by having the right partners in the right places, they can help with that. Partners help to rally the community around your initiative and its goals, what you're trying to work towards. Partners can also champion your initiative. You cannot do this alone. So having a partner to really champion your initiative, and that could be partners who champion your initiative from your board of directors as well as in the community. Building awareness and capacity for sustainability requires a strategic approach and partnerships across sectors, including alliances with private and public organizations, including universities, community foundations like the one I run right now. And sometimes I reflect and I thought, we never really approached our community foundation for help with our fatherhood program. We were just relying on our federal funds. So that is a no-no. It's very important to make sure that you're really maximizing all your funding pools within your community. Partnerships ultimately create synergy. And really, you help to build a movement around your cause because the sum of the individual parts is going to be really less than what you can get as a whole. Working synergistically, the sum of the whole is greater than what you'll get from just working by yourself in your own little corner of the world. And then organizational capacity. This is really having the infrastructure, the internal support, and the resources that you need to effectively manage your program. It encompasses a wide range of capabilities, knowledge, and resources, from having enough staff and the leadership, having the leadership in place, the strong leadership in place. That can really make such a difference in accomplishing your goals. Cultivating and strengthening your internal support can also build your capacity and help you to grow as an organization and really increase the likelihood of your success. It's what I've learned over the years more than ever is that it's so important to have the right people on your team. It's so important to have the right people on your bus. And if you discover that someone is, this work is really, really important. It's almost like when I was doing this work directly, it was like a ministry. And the people who were there were really in it, not because they, not just for the money, but also because it's a way for them to give back to the community, to invest in the lives of others. So you need people like that in your team. If you discover as you go along that the people on your bus, that they aren't the right ones, please stop and let them off. Just get them off your bus because it's better to do it sooner than later because, that person or persons may end up affecting the journey. So take time also to build your key systems within your organization, whether there's I'm referring here to financial systems, your human resources, your procurement, whatever it is. Take the time to really build that within your organization and also invest in your people by dedicating part of your budget towards their professional development so that they can remain on the cutting edge of the work. Program evaluation is also a very important part of the work. Really evaluating whether you're really achieving the goals that you set out to achieve, and whether your process, your program is operating, your processes are operating the way that you intend. Evaluation helps to keep your initiative on track with towards your desired outcomes. If evaluation data shows that an activity or strategy isn't working, you can correct your initiative's course to make the initiative more effective. Your evaluation also helps to measure whether your performance is as it should be. Collecting data about your initiative's success and impact is a powerful tool for gaining support and funding. So it's not that you're just doing it because, it's just something you have to do, but that is really going to be used as your tool to sell your program to others and to be able to sustain that effort and to develop champions along the way. You use the story that you gain from your evaluation to tell the world about what you're doing and to get their help and get their support and really look at it just not in a quantitative way, but also a qualitative way. So it's okay to have the raw numbers, but also being able to tell the story of that person or persons who have been impacted by your program. And don't do it alone. Get the help, get the professional help that you need to make it happen. The next domain is program adaptation. which is really taking actions to make adjustments to ensure the ongoing effectiveness of your initiative. Circumstances change, and sometimes your initiative needs to change as well. The goal is not necessarily to sustain every component over time, but rather to sustain the most effective components and their benefits to your target group. So this requires you being flexible, adapting to changing conditions, and mechanisms for quality improvement within your initiative. By using your evaluation data and the most current evidence base, you can ensure that your initiative effectively uses resources and continues to have an impact. So as you adapt your initiative, it's very important to make sure to keep up to date on what is current in the field. Keep up to date on the best practices so that you can be on the cutting edge. So once you evaluate, you may then have to adapt some things that are not working right or whatever it is. But program adaptation is also very important. Communications is the next key domain that can lead to sustainability. And it's really just getting the word out to your stakeholders and the general public about your program. People need to know what your initiative is about and why it's important. You know what it is, but oftentimes we forget to really go out and tell the world about the great things that you're doing in the lives of fathers. Communication externally about your initiative's effectiveness helps to gain greater visibility and build support from stakeholders. And even internally, evidence that your initiative is working, even within your staff, motivates them. It really helps to increase buy-in and support from your internal organizational leaders. The more people know and care about your initiative and mission, the more likely they are to support your efforts to continue providing services in the long term. Nonprofits are usually so busy providing services that they forget to take the time to tell the story. And you can't do it alone. Get an intern. If you can't afford a communications director, get an intern. Get someone whose job it is to really go out there and tell your story. And I've been in rooms where donors have been moved to tears just by a story of an individual that I've shared, where someone who's been impacted by their dollars. I mean, it's just amazing the power of just sharing a story of impact. Environmental support is another key domain. It's really having the support both internally and externally for your program. Overall economic and political climate will affect your program and will affect your ability to get things done, whether it's at the local government, federal government. I don't have to go into much details about that. Initiatives are also influenced by internal organizational politics and leadership. And this is greater for those of you who are in larger organizations. You're not going to be able to pick who the director is or who is in political office, but they can have a big impact on your program. Whether they support your cause or support your opposition, decision makers require your attention. So it's important to make time to speak with your local leaders, your mayors, your legislators about your initiative and why it's important and why you need them to support you as you try to make a difference in the lives of fathers. And finally, funding stability. Whenever we think of sustainability, we usually just think of, just getting enough money for my program. So hopefully by identifying the other 7 domains, hopefully you've bought into the idea that it's more than just the money. Planning for the sustainability of funding should be a strategic process that addresses the long-term needs of your initiative, adjusting to changing trends in economic and political cycles. So you should know exactly what it takes to operate your program, not just because OFA gives you a certain amount of money, but you should know what it would take to operate your model with or without OFA support. A defined plan with an adaptive time frame that maintains those put stress and make it difficult to provide consistent quality services. And valuable staff may leave or have to be laid off if funding shortfalls are anticipated. We all been there, done that. Initiatives that rely on a single source of funding are more vulnerable to funding cuts. So cultivating a stable and diverse funding base is absolutely essential for ongoing sustainability. So you cannot, as the saying goes, you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. And you have to plan ahead of time. Don't wait until September when you're not sure about what's going to happen to your funding in October. Planning for funding stability should begin at the beginning of a grant. Consider social enterprises. At Kisra, we had an urban farm and a culinary initiative, all various initiatives that help to bring in streams of income. Now I'm working on, at the foundation, we're looking at creative things like impact investing, partnerships where a funder, a donor, an investor really, would give to an initiative looking for not just a social return, but also a financial return. So these are all creative opportunities, creative partnerships for you to explore as you seek to widen and diversify your funding services. Also looking for fees for services, through government agencies. Those are all opportunities, as well as your community foundation, national foundation, state government, to name a few. So that is my time, and I thank you for the opportunity. I hope you have learned something from what I've shared, and I'll get your questions at the end of the other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. It was outstanding. We have a couple minutes for a couple quick questions, so if you don't mind, can I throw a couple at you?
Sure.
Okay. One of them, you've been on both sides of the coin. You've been a grantee pursuing funding, and now you're sitting in a position where you are the funder. For someone on the line that has not reached out to a foundation yet, what's your advice on the first thing that they should do before reaching out to a foundation that may be local to them, maybe national? What's the first thing that they should do before reaching out to a funder?
I think the first thing I would recommend is looking on their website to see their process. Because a lot of times, like our foundation, you wouldn't, for funding in our proactive area, you wouldn't just submit a proposal blindly. You have to connect with a program officer. So figuring out exactly what that funder's application process is critical. And also maybe just making an appointment to come by, and you can do that in person. To speak, whether, depending on how big the foundation is, you may speak to a program officer, or you may speak to the president of the foundation, and just to kind of let them know who you are and what you're about, and to gain information in person. And even, consider inviting them to show them your work. invite them to your site, invite them to your class to really get that firsthand viewpoint. I think more and more funders, they want to have that close connection. They want to be proximate with the work that they're funding. So those are a few ideas that come to mind.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know a lot of people worry about whether you start at the top. I don't want to use the word the bottom, but do you start at some program level person? Do you have a thought about preference? You're sitting at the top. I mean, what's your thought about the first point of outreach? Is it president's office or is it a program officer?
I guess it depends on the size of the foundation.
Uh-huh.
If it's a Ford Foundation, you're not going to get to the president. You know what I mean? It all depends on the foundation, and it never hurts to try. And if you can't get to the president, they'll refer you to an appropriate program officer. But I think it doesn't hurt to try. Be bold. Go ahead and ask to meet with the president.
Be bold.
Be bold.
I like that.
Don't be bashful. Go for it.
I like that. Hashtag be bold. I love it.
Hashtag.
I love it. Thank you, Dr. Foster. We got a couple more questions that we'll toss at you at the end of today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce you guys to our second presenter, Ms. Kathy Lambert, CEO and co-founder of Connections to Success. Similar to Dr. Foster, if you haven't checked her website or checked the work they've done, it'd be in your best interest to visit their website and find out all the amazing work that Kathy and team are doing. Kathy is a forward-thinking social entrepreneur, social justice advocate, and thought leader. In 1998, she founded Dress for Success Midwest. Then, in 2001, recognizing the gaps in available job readiness services, she and her husband, Brad, co-founded Connections to Success, which has become nationally recognized as an evidence-based model for improving children's futures by first empowering parents to become economically independent. The organization provides services designed to break the generational cycle of poverty and inspire individuals to realize their dreams and achieve economic independence by providing hope, resources, and a plan. Please join me in welcoming Kathy to today's webinar. Kathy, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here today. With Connections to Success, our vision, as you can see, is to be the leader in empowering individuals in their transformation to economic independence. And we do that by our mission, which is to inspire individuals to realize their dreams and achieve economic independence by providing hope, resources, and a plan. And thank you, Patrick, for the great introduction, because it really kind of gives us our history. So as you can see here, we are based in St. Louis, Kansas City, and then also in East St. Louis. And we had our first Responsible Fatherhood grant in 2011, but our first federal grant we actually had in 2004. We began then replicating our model in 2013 in the state of Kansas. And then in 2015, we have a Healthy Marriage and Relationship grant. And in 2016, which I'm going to talk more about, is we really started taking a look to be more data-driven and really having that a part of our whole organization in our strategic plan, from our board to our staff. And this past year, really taking a look at a digital platform and really how we can take that data and be able to scale the program for impact. So our basic model, I'm just going to just really briefly just show with you what our model is, which is workforce readiness. We have a 3-week class. It's cognitive, critical thinking, skill-based. We also focus on education and skill building, employment, life coaching, and mentoring. We have lifelong engagement, but this is the whole crux of our program. And as you can see, the next slide, thank you, with our evaluation, we had taken a look at the dads in our fatherhood program. And so taking a look at that and really looking to see what is it that we really want to document. And so we can see that economic stability with employment, responsible parenting skills, and a healthy relationship skills. And it's really about putting one dad to work for 1 year. What is that outcome and what does that mean? And so working with St. Wall Street and really putting together the program impact analysis You can see that putting one dad to work creates $1,500 in new federal income tax. It also creates $500 in new state income tax. It's $3,060 in incarceration. And then what was actually paid back into child support was over, as you can see, over $4,500. So really taking that data, and then how can we have that data help us with sustainability? So taking a look at sustainability, and those of you who are on this webinar, many of you are probably like us, that really taking a look at restricted versus unrestricted funding. And how do we move forward? And do that with capacity building, and then taking a look at the data and become data-driven, and then what is that return on investment? And then looking at the strategy, whether it's you have a model or whatever way of how you're getting your outcomes, and taking a look at that, and then what are those strategic partnerships? So we really, this past year, actually just about a year ago, we had an opportunity with another funder, a foundation, and part of it, we applied for a capacity building grant. And part of that, they wanted us to take the CCAT, which is a core capacity assessment tool. And this, I can't tell you enough, it just made the difference for our organization. And what it did, it really did an assessment of where we are as an organization, for example, on a bell curve. And to see on that bell curve, where are we? Well, our results, we were at the top of the bell curve, which is good. However, looking to see it, we almost maybe had a little tilt to the right. And what that meant is that actually we were really at the perfect place for capacity building. But it also meant, and it gave us the information to say what are those areas that we really need to pay attention to in order to grow and to go to that next level. So the main areas were we had to go back and revisit our program. So we started almost 20 years ago. So taking a look and having to go back through and circle through, making sure that we have the right people, as Michelle, as you talked about, getting the right people on the bus. They have to have the passion to do the work. But did we have those right people? Were we getting the results that we needed to with our program? So really digging in and doing the hard work that it takes to really retool within our program. Also, it showed, too, that we needed to take a look at our board and our board structure. And do we have the right people on our board? And really taking a look, too, at going from, and I think, starting as just a grassroots and growing the way we have over the 20 years, is that the board also has to change. And one of the lessons I think we have learned is that we really need to have a fundraising board. And so taking a look, what does that mean to have a fundraising board? So taking a look at that, also with marketing and communications. Many of you know that those are unrestricted funds, many times to even hire someone. So another lesson we learned, we didn't really put any money into marketing and communications and branding. And I really think within this last year, what I've learned is that we really missed the boat. Because really with our branding, some people, even in our local areas, don't really know who we are. And that's not good. And it's not good with funding and foundations. So we're really focusing on marketing and communications and really building that brand. And then, so with all of this, taking a look at what does it mean then with gathering the data and capacity building. And I love this quote that's here, that organizations that collect and use high-quality data from program evaluation and gather stakeholder input for planning and strategy implementation efforts are significantly more sustainable than those that don't. So we really had to value the process of learning, and it's not just about gathering the data, but how do we review it, analyze it, contextualize it, and then inform our strategic planning and where we go moving forward. So part of that then is a data-driven culture, and a culture of data from our frontline staff to our leaders to our board What does that mean in utilizing our data, and how can we use that for sustainability? So one of the ways is really taking a look at how can we look at the data and what does it tell us about where we need to maybe allocate some resources or we need to pay attention to. And a couple of examples. For example, we noticed that many of the individuals, many of the dads that were coming out of incarceration, many of them that they needed to have their eyes tested and needed glasses. So we established a partnership with lens crafters to help address that need. Also, we partnered, for example, with dental clinics. We noticed that that was another need. So again, taking that data, finding out from the dads and their families, what is it that they need, and then how can we take that and meet that need. So it really gives us more of a story as well. So looking at the data, and the being data-driven, I think, is really a mindset and a mind shift and a cultural shift. So that's something that we've also been working on within this past year, and really being able to take the data and to tell the story. And the stories are what we have found is that to be able to share with foundations, with various funders, with partnerships, it's all about taking the data and to be able to show what the results are, what is the impact that you're having within the organization, and what is that return on investment. And once we went through this process, it helped us tremendously with our funding and being able to show the direct impact of every dollar that someone invests within the organization. We can show that, you know what, 3 times more is what's really going to be benefiting from that dollar, that it costs, the benefits way outweigh the cost. And many times what we like to say is that our program doesn't cost, it actually pays. And another example of what we did within the state of Kansas with Fatherhood is we had the opportunity in working with child support and putting together, we did a little pilot project actually, and with what they did in the state of Kansas is they said, you know what we'll do is we will give $50 an hour credit towards the arrears of any dad that signs up to your class, and we'll give the $50 an hour and cap it at $1,500. And so after 6 months, they had forgiven over $90,000, but actually what was paid into the state by the dads that were working was over actually $300,000. So you look at that return on investment, and that's what's helped us within the state of Kansas of really taking and training others and doing the work we do. But it's another way of taking that data and helping to think also outside of the box of what can be done. So looking at replication of our model, and I don't know, I guess I always like to think of it's not just of a model, but it's also what do you have? What are you doing well, like your strategy or training, and how to develop that into a fee for service. And then be able to, how can you scale the impact of what you're doing within your organization? So one of the things that we also took a look at is how can we partner with like-minded organizations to possibly offer any training or technical assistance. And then with Kansas, and because of what we did, that little pilot has really helped us. We now have 7 other sites that we're working with in Kansas, so it offered other opportunities, but now also outside of the state of Kansas. So really helping us to scale that impact. And much of this has also been, I think, which the work that we've been doing, but then along with going through that CCAT assessment and really taking a look at that long-term sustainability. Another area is looking at strategic partnerships. And so there's some that are listed here, a couple on the slide, but before that, one of the things I think all along that we've done well is partnering with corporations and volunteers. And volunteers, and all along for the last 20 years, volunteers have really been the fabric, if you will, of the work that we do. And so taking a look at corporations and with their corporate philanthropy, many times, and what I've learned over the years, is that volunteers, if you get people volunteering from corporations and their skills and skill-based volunteer activities like having them help with mock interviews, mentoring, having them engage with the dads, what that leads to, it also leads to corporate dollars. So volunteers and corporate partnerships, strategic partnerships are extremely valuable. Also taking a look at, right now, what we're looking at is the two-generation approach and partnerships. So one that's listed here is with SIUE in Edwardsville in East St. Louis, and it's really coming together with their Head Start and saying, again, outside of the box, how can we really truly come together being like-minded with the mission of the whole family? And how can we bring our resources collectively together to do this work? And working with the parents of the children that Head Start. So not only with them, but bringing together also the Housing Authority and workforce development. And thinking about what partnerships do you all have? What do you have that you can bring together to help with those resources and also help to scale the impact of the work that you're doing? Capacity building partnerships with local foundations. This has been really interesting, and I'm not sure if you all have had the same experience that we have, but many times with foundations and even corporations, many times applying for a grant, they want you to do a new project. And so a local foundation that has been very generous to us and very good for the last 12 years, every year or 2 years within the grant, we have to have a new project. And so after going through this process with the CCAT survey, our team, and we took a look at everything and thought, you know what, this is what we need. We need marketing and communications. We need capacity building. So I had a meeting with them, and we were talking about the upcoming cycle, and I asked them, I said, you know, would you be open to capacity building and doing a grant for that? So they asked me to explain it, and I shared with them the whole process of the assessment and what this would do for us as an organization. And they said, you know what, put the proposal together and submit it. And so we submitted it. We actually just recently found out we got it, which we're thrilled. But I think that it's educating our funders and foundations. And Michelle, I love how you're already thinking outside of the box and thinking about impact investing. That's what it's going to take, is for us to really educate also the funders of how they can think differently and how they can help us not just always creating a new project, but how can they really strengthen the work that we're already doing to help really scale that impact. The other partnership, and you alluded to that, Patrick, is when you talked about Starbucks. It's actually with, in St. Louis, a local partnership we have is with Natalie's Cakes and More. And what we talked about and what she came to us actually is that cookies. She has some cookies and cakes, but one of the cookies that she said, you know, with one of the programs we have is for a youth scholarship program. And she said, you know what, let's partner together. And of the cookies, I will give the percent of the profit back to the organization to support the youth. So what that has done, she really is in Starbucks, which is great. But what that has done, it's also made us start to begin to think, how can we have other strategic partnerships? How can we also look at other ways of partnering together to also have different revenues back into the organization? So that's one way. Another way is social enterprises. We've learned, lessons learned. We've learned of some things that didn't work out very well and what we don't do well. But we also know that we have to also keep trying and to see what other things can work. So we have in St. Louis and Kansas City, we have launched what we call our Moxie Boutique, and it has a dual purpose. One is to scale our Dress for Success for not only women, but it's men and women. And we take our clothing actually to the organizations and helping to suit them. That's one part. The other part is we take that out and we partner with local boutiques. And they donate clothing to us or accessories or what have you. And then we have different corporations, different individuals that will do parties with a purpose. And so we go out with these new items, and we are actually able to sell the items, and the money then comes back into the organization. It also helps with our brand recognition, bringing someone. We always take, somebody with us to share their story. If it's a dad, if it's a mom, to be able to share that whole story, and actually then also bringing that together for income, and also it helps to spread and to gain more volunteers in that regard. So I think that probably to really wrap it up, there is a quote that I just heard, and I'd love to share it with you. And how do you make common sense common practice? And it's not on the slide, but I love that, because sometimes I think that with common sense is the work that we're all doing, right? And the impact that we're having in our communities and with the families. And how can we take that work and make it that common practice for funders to be able to do things differently and to fund the impact that we're actually doing? Thank you.
Phenomenal. 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 Thank you for mentioning the Starbucks piece, too. I thought that was important. So there are a number of questions that I have for you, Kath. I want to save them to the end. But just give you a teaser. One of the questions I want to come back to later is, I know some people decide to use data and some use stories to kind of tell the essence of the program. I'd love to come back to you and ask you, which do you use and who do you use them for? I know you use them for different reasons, but I want to find out and help the audience here how you use which for which audience. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, I'll come back to you on that. Thank you again. Wonderful information. Before we go to our last presenter, I'd like to also ask Enzo if he bring up our second poll for you guys to complete. We'll give a few minutes for that. Thanks so much, Enzo. The question is to improve program sustainability, the organization I work with, and then you're to check all applicable responses. So it's on the screen now. If you would just complete that, that'd be great. I'd also encourage you while you're doing that to look at the Ask a Question box. If you have questions that you're thinking about that have come to you as you've heard from Dr. Foster and Kathy, feel free to drop those in there. We want to get as many questions answered as possible, seeing that funding and sustainability is core to the life of our projects, but also supporting the families in our community. Okay, our last presenter is Dr. Andrew Freeberg. Dr. Freeberg is Director of Community Programs for Goodwill, Easter Seals in Minnesota. Runs an amazing program. His bio is extensive, but I'll give you just a little bit for you to hear. Andrew has more than 15 years of experience in developing, implementing, and managing community-based services designed to help low-income individuals and families in Minnesota achieve personal and economic stability. The end goal of this work is to reduce recidivism, disparities, and dependence on public benefits. Andrew currently oversees reentry, responsible fatherhood, FAST, which is an acronym, and TANF services, known locally as the Minnesota Family Investment Program, or MFIP, for Goodwill's Easter Seals, Minnesota. Prior to joining Goodwill Easter Seals, he managed the Father Project for the city of Minneapolis and worked as a bilingual individual and family therapist for Comunidades Latinas Unidas en Servicio. That was a failed attempt, but I tried, Andrew. Right. Andrew holds a doctorate and clinical and community psychologist from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Freeberg to our webinar. Andrew, the time is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. And yeah, we'll stay on the line. We'll work on your Spanish a little bit afterwards and get you up to speed. But I really appreciate that warm welcome, and in particular, just really appreciate the opportunity to join my colleagues Michelle and Kathy on this important topic. And it's great to connect with our fatherhood colleagues as always. So I appreciate the time today. As Patrick mentioned, I've been working with the Father Project for quite a number of years. This is this fine picture of one of our program participants who was actually featured at a kind of a large-scale fundraising event that we did at Goodwill Easter Seals called our Power of Work dinner that we hold as an annual event. So it was really awesome to see a father held up in front of the larger community of funders, staff, board of directors, opportunity for us to, within our fairly large Goodwill organization, to continue to champion and promote the issue of fatherhood. And I think I'm already hearing just a number of themes across both Michelle and Kathy's that I'll kind of touch on maybe, in a little bit more of a tips and just some of the concrete things that we've done, sort of, I think that do align with the framework that Michelle talked about and many of the strategies that Kathy alluded to as well. So the mission of the Father Project, really, I think I'm going to go to the next slide here, which been around since 1999, and I guess I'm proud of the fact that the mission has really stayed consistent, and as we've been involved in various projects over the years, we've been able to stay true to that, and at the same time kind of continuing to just assess and analyze what is that context around us so that we can continue to stay relevant, continue to have the impact on fathers as we've gone along. So Father Project started actually back in those who may remember the Partners for Fragile Families days, funded through Ford Foundation and the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement. That was a federally funded project that we could see the end coming. We knew the timeline that it was coming, and that was kind of our first opportunity to say, how are we going to keep the doors open at Father Project? So we, about a year in advance of that, I highlighted that second bullet point, downsizing. So as we were winding down the grant and we saw that end of that fiscal year coming, we got down to core staff, strong staff that we really wanted to make every effort to keep with us to keep things going. Folks like Guy Bowling, who's been in the fatherhood field a long time, Michelle Bell, who was a key staff at the time. And I think, as has been alluded to, you can't always guarantee that you're going to keep key staff, but everything you can do can be extremely helpful along those lines. At the time, we felt like we were having impacts. The program model was coming together, so we approached a number of nonprofit organizations that we felt had a similar mission and vision, and one of those was Goodwill Easter Seals, and we were able to navigate and negotiate a merger of the Father Project. So in 2004, myself, along with about 3 or 4 staff at the time, became employees of Goodwill Easter Seals, and the Father Project became a program of Goodwill Easter Seals, and that was our first transition. And we operated kind of on a shoestring budget for a couple of years, the integrity of the model being really the key, and really soaking in and trying to learn as much as we could to take advantage and collaborate and be really internalize the expertise that Goodwill had in the employment and training arena. So then when the opportunity came through OFA to apply for the Responsible Fatherhood funding, we felt like we were in a great position. We were successful in securing that, and then went on to another round of funding through OFA in 2011 that ran through 2015. And then we were kind of hit with that reality of, okay, we have to downsize again, and it was a significant downsizing at the time when we did not receive funding through OFA. And I think, you know, sort of the lesson learned, the really tough lesson for us was, you know, had we really done everything that we could to diversify our funding and to really put ourselves in a position to sustain the program beyond that. So we have been able to continue on and kind of add, sort of by necessity, some other funding streams into the mix. City funding that came through a new source for us, which was through the Public Health Department. And then just this last legislative session, the state of Minnesota appropriated some funds directly to Goodwill Easter Seals and two of our partners here in Minnesota to continue to be able to provide services through the Father Project. So I wanted to kind of walk you through the history, but also use that opportunity to sort of highlight some of the steps we took and had to take to keep things going again over the last 18 years. And I've kind of alluded to the quality programming, the integrity of the programming, finding funding that really aligns with what your program is designed to do. Relevant quality partners, you know, for us that has been primarily child support and trying to maintain that relevance of child support in addition to some of our workforce development partners. When we talk about achieving high impact outcomes, I put the emphasis there on parenting and workforce development. I think, you know, for example, Father Project, in the early days, the emphasis was really heavy on parenting, and we have really tried to put a lot of effort and emphasis on staying current, staying relevant when it comes to workforce development, training, career pathways, and those kinds of things that I think just, again, out of necessity, we have to continue to stay relevant in the workforce development field. Fatherhood awareness and program exposure, you know, I think the thing that I would say after 18 years is we just can never really take it for granted that it is a story that needs to be told, data that needs to be shared, and really a case that just continues to need to be made so that folks understand the importance of engaging fathers as part of the solution to family stability, part of the solution to our communities really moving forward in a positive direction so that the children will thrive. And then lastly, just it's an ongoing process of, you know, what are the tools? You know, social media didn't even exist, and now a question of, you know, how are we going to reach the people that we need to reach through just a variety of formats and tools. So again, I mean, I think I've kind of touched on this already, and you know, I guess the last bullet point there, I'm going to hopefully move into some examples there of just a little bit more detail of what we've done to diversify funding, and then share very briefly some of the tools that we have developed to state the case and tell the story. And you know, if anybody's interested in, you know, getting copies of those or getting into more detail, I'm certainly happy to share whatever I can. This is just a very brief example of, you know, we all know logic models and evaluation. The reason I put this one in here is that we found a way to kind of connect a logic model to try to make it a little bit more accessible. We put hyperlinks in here to some brief participant videos and statements that tied back to specific outcomes, be those short-term impacts or long-term impacts, to try to just find a way to, you know, take it from something that typically you see on paper or electronic format, tie that to some YouTube videos and things like that to help try to bring the logic model and outcomes to life. So that is just one brief tool I wanted to share. Secondly, I wanted to just talk a little bit about, with one specific example, about our workforce development example and some of what we have really integrated, again, based on our connection here locally with Goodwill Easter Seals, being a program of Goodwill Easter Seals Minnesota. Labor market need, there's just a lot of great tools. I know through our State Department of Economic Development, LMI, labor market information, what are the trends, what are we seeing, and how are we going to connect the dads that we serve, barriers they're facing, to be ready and ready to go as part of that next generation to join the workforce. Business and community partnerships are a big part of that. The example that we use here, we have established business advisory councils that are comprised of employers representing specific industries, for example, construction, automotive, medical office, trying to help us understand, well, what are the business needs of employers? What do we need to be training and teaching curriculum-wise, and so that folks in a very short period of time, regardless of high school diploma, criminal background, that we're getting them in an 8-week, a 10-week, a 12-week period of time, ready to enter the workforce in an industry that needs employees, and that they've got the skills to enter as an entry-level employee, and then try to provide support so that folks advance and move on from that. And I think the next slide here is just kind of a logo example of some of the corporate partners that we have integrated as partners on some of the business advisory councils. Part of the Power of Work dinner, for example, Fendler Patterson had made a very generous donation to support the skills training programs over the years, and folks like Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank have made contributions of in-kind donations that have been very helpful. So connecting our employment training and education with our Father Project has really been a powerful model. I won't spend a lot of time, I guess, talking about the return on investment. That has kind of been discussed, and the figures that we came out with, the most recent intensive ROI that we conducted here on Father Project was back in 2009. And I think the numbers were very similar to what Kathy shared, just over like a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of the dollars invested and the return on those dollars invested. But for us, I think we still found a lot of relevance, particularly in this past year when we started reaching out to state legislators and folks at that level, that they're really interested in some data that they could share with constituents that could help us make the case for supporting Father Project in that way. So again, a lot more could be said about the Wilder research return on investment, but I'll kind of leave it at that. Again, St. Wall Street has kind of been, that was just an extensive process that we went through. We got a lot out of it in terms of just some new and innovative ways to state the case, tell our story, and raise awareness. And I think just in summary there, I think the big takeaway that I had, in addition to the cost-benefit analysis and the importance of really making that economic case for the relevance of your program, a lot of times we put a lot of energy, time, effort, language, brochures, et cetera, into describing the services, and sort of the impact of those services can tend to take a back seat. So I think that was really a push from the St. Wall Street group, and we came out with the end product of that process was really, I think, being able to do a much better job of describing the impact of the services as opposed to dwelling too much on the services themselves. Again, I'm not sure we're doing anything necessarily extremely innovative on when it comes to social media, but I wanted to put this out there. We did have an opportunity to do a pretty professional profile of a Father Project participant, and we just have had numerous opportunities to share that at events and speaking engagements and just different ways to get it out in front of people via social media, via some in-person presentations, and it's kind of a tried and true kind of thing, but just trying to find, continue to find impactful ways to utilize that to tell the story. And then just a brief word, I guess, about how can we utilize and partner with participants and participants who have succeeded and have just their lives has changed and been transformed. And what we've seen at Father Project is a lot of those dads really come through that process wanting to give back and wanting to be a part of, like, helping other people understand, hey, my life has changed, I've been transformed, how can I help give back to other dads, help promote the program so that more dads can be served. So this is something that really came to life in the 2011 OFA grant that we received, was really giving dads a message that they are, they're coming to us because they're looking for a service and they're looking to make a change, but they have the potential to be leaders and be leaders within their family, be leaders within the community, and that's really how we see them, and wanting to engage dads at that level with the mindset of, okay, you achieved that, what's your next step? What's your next step? What's your next step? And, so for us, this meant, once you enroll in the program, you complete parenting classes, you complete advanced parenting classes, and then we created some leadership track options, one of which was becoming a mentor, one of which was becoming trained as a parenting group facilitator, which was powerful, for the other dads, to be led through that parenting group process by some dads who had been through it themselves. And then finally, and I know the lettering is very small on this, but the citizen father, which was I'm a part of my community, let me get out there and do presentations and tell the story in that way. So I think, when I look back on everything we've done, those are the kinds of things that I think we've seen the highest impact, especially with folks who they may not totally get it and understand the impact and the importance of really engaging dads when they get a chance to hear from some of those participants. It's just been really powerful for us. The state appropriation, again, I think this was just sort of the culmination of, there was the necessity to say we've got to get out here and we've got to really ask for funding in a new and different way. And I'd say we just used all of the tools and all of the strategies and all of the relationship building efforts that I've already described to try to get in front of legislators and decision makers, bipartisan, and for us here in Minnesota, that meant just, reaching out to both sides of the aisle, maybe tailoring the emphasis of what we were talking about depending on the audience, and making sure we brought partners to the table, that if this was a statewide message, that we needed to make sure that we had the interests of urban dads as well as dads in greater Minnesota, some of the rural parts of our state, kind of coming together so that it had a broader appeal. And, and fortunately for us, those are some of the relationships we've been able to continue to nurture and cultivate over the years, so that when the time came to have those conversations, we had those partners that were speaking on behalf of their own community and the needs that they were seeing in their own community. And it was just amazing to see, like Park Rapids, Minnesota, which is a very small town in a county that's pretty rural, come together with Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Rochester, Minnesota, which is kind of a medium-sized city, but ultimately we were effective in making that case. And here's just I guess the most recent thing that we've kind of been working on is trying to see what kind of connections with, in addition to what I've talked about workforce development and parenting, connections to public health. And I think there's a lot of interest here, I know locally in the Twin Cities. How do we reach the families that really need help? And one of those vehicles and avenues, whether it's child protection, foster care system, just so many families that are really facing the economic challenges and some of those family stability questions. Public health and a home visiting model that I think does need a little bit of work could benefit from thinking about engaging dads in a new way. So that's where we've gotten some of those fundings in Minneapolis. Park Rapids is utilizing public health dollars in rural Minnesota, and we're trying to see where we can pull on that string to continue to promote the work of the Father Project. So with that, I will wrap up my comments and just appreciate everybody's attention, and thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Freeberg. Thank you so much for giving us some of your lessons learned, but also examples, real examples of how you guys have done that. So at this time, we're going to go through a speed round of questions that we have for our presenters. And so I'm going to just call upon you guys. You guys can still, the audience members can still use the Ask a Question box to submit questions, but I'll go through some rapid fire questions and try to get as many answered as I can. I'll start back with you, Kathy. One of the questions that I want to just hear from you is, do you use data or do you use stories, and do you differentiate who you're using with? So give us some insight about how you guys think about that.
This is Kathy. You know what? With answering that question, usually what I always do is I would tell a story but back it up with the data. So the stories always go with the data, and you need to have the data. And then looking at what, different audiences really depends on what story I share. But the data is definitely imperative to share along with the story.
So you do both?
I do both. Now in grants, obviously, really there's not the place for the story, and then you need that data. Yeah. But I generally do. I usually always, if I'm telling a story, I always back it up with the data.
Yep.
So I can show the impact.
Awesome. Dr. Foster, you mentioned earlier about people when they're first reaching out or looking for a foundation to support them, should check the website. What should they be looking for on the website?
Just their funding guidelines and their funding process. How do they go about, what is their application process like? They're doing that basic homework, look at the things that they fund, the kinds of, their priority areas. Okay. So that should all be on a foundation's website.
Awesome. Great guidance. Dr. Freeberg, when you think about who you guys use when you do your outreach, it looks like you guys have a menu of corporate and community, not grants, but community partners. Who do you typically take with you for some of those initial meetings? Do you take families or participants, program director, program manager? What level? Who do you take with you?
Yeah, probably for initial meetings, probably not so much program participants, but I think one of the strengths that we're able to bring is, for example, one of my colleagues, the director of employment training and education, who really has that, not only the knowledge of the industry, the connection to employers, but also local connections to a lot of the technical colleges and those education opportunities. Much deeper expertise than I would have, for example, could partner with our Father Project program manager and attend that meeting if we're trying to make a deliberate connection between the training and the fatherhood piece.
Yep, that's good. That's good. Kathy, when it comes to board engagement, I know a lot of nonprofits, I hear stories on both ends talk about using the board to help fundraise. What's your best advice for getting your board to support you? And what's realistic when it comes to fundraising when you think about your board?
So thinking about, it's interesting you're talking about that because we're kind of going through a restructuring or taking a look at that right now. I think that really one of the lessons I learned, Patrick, is being really intentional with a board member of setting up what are those requirements to be on the board and having them sign an actual, basically like a board commitment form. And so they commit to how much they're going to raise. And we have within being a board member, there's a give and or get threshold that they need to meet. So then that plan, they have a plan for the year. How are they going to do it? What are they going to personally give? There's an amount that they need to personally give. And then how are they going to get the rest of it? And to just stay engaged with them. And that really, what I've learned is really to be the key is to stay engaged with them. But right up front is this is what the requirements are to be on the board.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. One of the things I've seen, it was probably a program I met a couple years ago, and they were at one point struggling with board donations, and it's just simple, realistically, what happened today. They were trying to get people to fill out these forms and doing checks, and they ended up getting an auto deduction, like you would a bank draft, and people were paying like $20 every 2 weeks, but it came out of your check, and it was probably the most successful strategy they've ever done to get the board involved. But also, some foundations expect 100% of your board to give, and by doing that simple strategy, it was successful at doing the fundraising, but also meeting some of the requirements for some of the funders. So that's super helpful, super helpful.
Yeah, that's a great strategy.
Works. Andrew, I think it was you that mentioned that you can bring the funder to you. It might have been you or Kathy. What's your experience with inviting a funder to you that you're trying to engage with to potentially give you some resources? Andrew.
Yeah, and I can maybe speak to that a little bit, Patrick. I think we've had success in, I go back to just really trying to raise awareness of, some new funders that may be more familiar with workforce development issues, a little bit less familiar with some of the family issues that we deal with. And if we can, one thing that comes to mind is inviting them to some of our participant recognition events where they can just get a real deep and personal glimpse of, what does that progress, what does that transformation look like, and then work backwards from, okay, now we've piqued your interest, now let's talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the program and kind of where things are headed that way.
Yep, that's great. Dr. Foster, you on the other end of the conversation, how do you respond to invitations to come to programs when they're courting you, more or less?
Oh, I go gladly. A lot of times, recently I've been inviting myself. I've been reaching out to nonprofits and said, hey, I want a tour of whatever the project is, and kind of being a little more proactive about it because I like what they're doing, and we have a proactive funding arm where we're really trying to initiate projects. So a lot of times I've been calling up, say, hey, I want a tour, and then try to figure out where their gaps are. But I would go, our program staff, myself, we would go readily if someone asked us.
I'm going to put an asterisk by that comment because I think I'm going to say this in the most loving way as possible. You're different. Some funders may not be as open to the invitation, so that's a good way to think about it. Let me ask you one follow-up question. If they do get a funder to come out for this kind of, you're courting each other, what should they focus on? You don't have all day, so what should they focus on showing a potential funder?
Really, I think the most beneficial, would be to speak with participants, frankly, nothing staged. Just being able to speak with someone who was impacted by the initiative. I really think in my foundation, in the past, they focused a lot on the inputs that they made to community. Oh, we gave this many millions, and so on. So what I've infused is really, and so what? What's been the impact of that? And that led to the development of our strategic impact measurement framework. But also I have participants come, I highlight, because we have an annual report to the community. And in the past, they have just talked about, oh, well, we've given out this many millions. But what I've done is said, okay, and, you know, this particular program has impacted someone like, you know, a participant like John. And I would talk about John's story. And then John would actually be there and wave, and, you know, and afterward, they flocked to him. They would, you know, they would flock to them. So I think that, you know, making it come alive. I mean, I actually, we've had a unique situation where one of our board members, because our board is mainly a policy board, so they don't necessarily fundraise. But I had one of my board members link me up to one of her clients. She's an accountant, and linked me up to one of her very wealthy clients to, you know, share what the needs are in the community and so on. And I shared what we were seeing in terms of demand for funding. And I told the story of a young man who was impacted by one of the programs we funded. And there were tears in her eyes. And from that simple pitch, she said, I'm going to give you $1 million, and I want you to get it out in a year. I don't want to endow it like typical funds. I want it to be on the street within 12 months. So I think you can, and what Kathy said about the combination, yes, I had data, but that simple story about this young man whose father was in prison, and it was a simple dance program, a simple arts initiative. And, you know, she was so touched by it. So definitely, you know, using stories to bring your ask alive is really important.
So true. That's so true. Very valuable, very valuable. Well, we've come to the time at the close of our webinar. I just want to personally and publicly thank you, Dr. Foster, Dr. Freeberg, and Kathy for being transparent, for sharing things that have really worked really well for you guys, but the challenges that you've experienced, and then some things for folks to think about. This is not going to go away. As long as we're doing this work, you know, sustainability and funding is always going to be a need and a priority. So I just want to thank you guys publicly for your transparency again on today's webinar. I want to close out with a couple of thoughts, things that I've heard and things that I would suggest. One of the things that I've seen in probably each of your programs, but also that have worked, is people who have role-played before going to visit a funder. It's because sometimes it gets unnerving. So role-play is a great exercise for staff who've never made the ask to practice that. It's very important. You don't want to fumble when you finally get to the big stage. The second thing that I would say, hearing each of you, a key takeaway that I heard is the value of relationships. I think each of you, as you've funded or been a part of being a funder, is that your value of the relationship. And I believe, in my mind, my experience, about 90% of it, unless you're applying federally, is relationship driven. And then the last thing that I would suggest, based on watching you guys, but also knowing the field, is that folks should align their potential funding requests with their program priorities and the people they're serving. I have a vivid example of a program that we did some years ago that targeted Foot Locker, and it was direct tie to the folks that we were serving. And so think about who locally you guys work with that might be a potential supporter. Financially, in-kind is as good as financial. I've seen programs who've gotten sandwiches donated from Chick-fil-A that would have cost, but they were in-kind. So just want to encourage you guys. I want to say thank you so much. If you have questions, you can follow up with us. Our email address is info@fatherhood.gov. If you have comments or suggestions for future webinars, you can do that as well. So I'll ask Enzo for posting of our last slide. And then we'll close out by saying thanks to everybody. So thanks so much, everybody. Please look forward to the posting of the audio as well as the materials that you guys have received for today's webinar. I'll say thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week. And I'll just remind you, continue to stay connected as funding is a priority for all of us. Have a great one.
That concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.